when you conceived this, how personal a story was it for you, if at all, other than obviously it being sort of your sort of writing, directing feature debut?
You know, it's a very personal movie. You know, to me, it probably work best when I'm, you know, pulling from emotional type of feelings and scenarios that I can sort of identify with. You know, and it's always just been easier for me that way, even though it kind of makes it for a more painful watching experience. You know, it's a pretty personal movie.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, how did you sort of conceive the story? What was, and given the fact that like it has kind of become a seminal story for a lot of filmmakers to tell as their first, a sort of coming of age kind of story. What about it? What about this particular story was something that was really important to you? And then how did you want to make sure that, other than obviously being from your point of view, like, did you want to make sure you distinguished it from being?
I do such little thinking about that kind of stuff that, you know, and I've been asked it, obviously, it's an obvious question to ask, but, you know, I didn't think about it as a genre, as a coming-of-age movie until people started sort of identifying it as that after I'd made it. You know, I just, you know, I've, you know, think about it more along the lines of sort of, you know, comedically, you know, I really sort of grew up loving sort of old screwball comedies, you know, whether it's, you know, Some Like It Hot or, you know, any of the Howard Hawks ones, and, you know, you know, or Marx Brothers movies, you know, I've always, you know, what I do love, you know, you know, I've always tried to sort of achieve is, you know, I think tonally is something where, you know, something can be equal parts funny and equal parts sad, which is, I think, a hard thing to pull off, but something that we were really sort of concerned with doing for this movie, you know, and yeah, you know, it's kind of a coming-of-age story in reverse, I guess, because it's, you know, it's about a boy who thinks he's a man and in the end realizes he's just a boy, rather than like the maturation process of a boy like rising to the occasion, becoming a man. You know, he starts the movie thinking he's that, and in the end we can kind of see that he just is, you know, very, very confused about who he really is. You know, he hasn't been completely honest with himself.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I thought was really interesting about that sort of central relationship between Michael and Uma's characters is that there are some aspects at which that he almost seems more mature than her, sure. and she or she less than him.
Sure.
You know, when you're sort of conceiving what I think is a really interesting sort of ensemble, but you have this obviously this relationship which kind of everything else sort of spirals out around. How tough or easy is it to sort of create, I guess, two multi-dimensional characters as opposed to, you know, like maybe in other films that you would only sort of have the one male protagonist and then everything.
Sure. I mean, we see this movie as an ensemble movie. You know, I think it's about everyone is dealing with sort of growing up in some way, whether it's Reese's character or Michael or Jake or Uma. You know, she's also in a place in her life where she has lived her life, you know, sort of recklessly, and is at a point right now where she's deciding whether she wants to grow up or not, and become an adult, and, you know. And Michael, you know, is in the same way, you know, in the way he perceives himself as kind of the myth of himself rather than like who he actually is, who's just, you know, a kid in a ridiculous suit and a stupid mustache. And I think, you know, casting is everything, you know. I think, you know, cast another actor as the lead Pace part and he may come off as, you know, really one-dimensional, but you cast such fantastic actors and all the work is kind of done for you, you know. I mean, you have to know what you want, you have to know the tone, but you know, my cast is the best, you know. I really say that, and I don't say that in like a way that like director says that and like is patting himself on the back. I think I am good at casting, but I think that these guys, that's all you have to do, you know, and they're terrific.
Mm-hmm. Well, Michael, you know, I mean, it's interesting because you know, the first time I remember really seeing him was in like Almost Famous, which is only 10 years ago, and yet it seems like, certainly in terms of the way he's grown up, a really dramatic change. What made him sort of the right actor to play this guy? Because I really feel like even though certainly more recent roles he's played in stuff like Snow Angels has been more mature, they've also been kind of still in that sort of adolescent mode. Like, you know, what made him sort of right for that sort of linchpin of between being sort of adolescent and grown up?
I think because the sweetness that is inside of him inherently that you see in Snow Angels or Gentlemen Broncos or Almost Famous allows him to get away with a lot more than other actors could in this part, where this is a character who sort of does things that are not always necessarily the most moral thing, even though he can rationalize almost everything, because he feels things to such an nth degree. And Michael, like, you can't take him seriously being an asshole. He's too sweet of a guy. He's such a gentle guy. He was originally cast as the Marshall character because that's really who he is. Mm-hmm. And sort of this innocent, sort of beautiful, kind of angelic kid. And he works from a very sort of emotional place, I think, and I think so do I. And so I think we were both sort of pulling on personal experiences for this. And Michael was like real, like, he would be crying in scenes where wasn't written to cry in, but just like, you could tell there was internal things going on there, and he was sort of coming to terms with things. And for everyone on the set, everyone was super inspired.
Mm-hmm. Well, you talk about sort of coming from an emotional place, but sort of architecturally, how do you structure your screenwriting efforts? Particularly because what you seem to do really effectively in the movie is create sort of an arc or a very sort of well-formed storyline for each of the characters. You talk about Michael's character, you talk about Marshall, you talk about, and both of those characters do have an arc, whereas one of them potentially doesn't necessarily need to have one, in order to have a full story, but you do manage to include that.
You should always challenge yourself to give characters as many sides as possible. If you have people around you to tell you can do more with scripts and stuff like that. I, of course, would be ready to shoot the first draft, which was terrible, but I'm just so anxious to get out there and start working with the actors. You just try to challenge yourself and look at the people who have done it for a lot of years and are better than you, like watch a Paul Thomas Anderson movie, watch a, Billy Wilder movie, and you want to challenge yourself and be as close to being as good as them. Like the masters, and they can always show, 2 or 3 sides of someone that you didn't think so. So it's, it's kind of interesting. It's just more interesting watching to do that, unless it's sort of like a broad comedy or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Sorry.
No, that's it.
You mentioned Lee Pace's character, and I think it's really interesting that he is a very multidimensional character. But what I actually think is really interesting is that we really kind of discover that more through what the other characters say about him.
Yeah, that's true.
How originally did you conceive him? And this guy is in such an archetypal way, sort of an adversary for the protagonist. But between Lee's performance, whether it was a matter of just casting him or the way that you conceive the character, how did you make sure that he was not just sort of like the douchebag boyfriend?
Sure, you just show more layers throughout the movie. You think someone's one way, and then you kind of realize he's kind of the only one who's honest about himself in the entire picture. He really is kind of the only one whose perception of himself and the perception of other people kind of adds up. And, I love, Alan Alda in Crimes and Misdemeanors is one of my favorite bad guys of all time, and he I showed Lee that part, because a lot of the movie's based on people that I know and parts of myself, and so I could pull from sort of personal experiences too, and I love the Lee Pace character, and the most important part is Lee never saw his character as an asshole. He was like, Lee would always talk about the movie, and I think this is the sign of like an amazing actor. He was like, yeah, why would this kid show up to my wedding? And that's how he sees it. He never saw it as the bad guy. He sees it as the hero, and which he kind of is, and he's, Lee, I don't have enough good things to say about. He's just a terrific actor.